And we are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel. My name is Tony Vicenda. I'm Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire here at Plus One is to help amazing designers find great players who love their games, and amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. We do that in a lot of different ways, but today we're sitting down with some of the folks from over at Stillfleet Studio to talk a little bit more about the grit system and specifically the grit jam that's happening right now, and some of the things that are going on with the game and the system. For folks who haven't heard of the grit system before, there's a ton of things that games you may have heard of that are powered by it. We've also done a deep dive into how the grit system helps tell the type of stories that it was designed to do with Wythe over on our Procedures at Play series earlier this year. I'm super excited to dive in because this is a system that I love watching in action and love when I get a chance to get to the table. So with that said, Wythe, Tony, let's have y'all introduce yourselves. We got to start with the most important question of all. As a fellow Anthony Tony, we gotta know, Tony, when do you decide to go by Anthony and when do you decide to go by Tony? And did you ever have an awkward elementary school phase where you were trying to make one happen and the other one was, and it wasn't?
No, there was a brief period in my late teens where my friends were calling me Tony as a joke because I really didn't like it. And then it just stuck. And so now I've just been Tony to everybody that matters and Anthony to those to those that don't. Although professionally, I'm trying to go by Anthony Grasso.
Yeah.
It makes it a little bit difficult to differentiate between the two.
I tried to make Anthony happen at one point in, I feel like it was second or third grade, and we had an Anthony move to the elementary school at the same time, which meant it was, in my mind, a great time to do it, but in retrospect, the dumbest time to do it also too. So, Wythe, have you ever tried to shift your name from one thing to another at any point in your life?
No, I mean, you'd think my parents were hippies and they gave me this old English name, and my middle name is an Irish name. It's Heyman. So my name's Wythe Heyman Marschall. And you'd think with such frankly weird by like kids in the 80s, 90s names standards, I would have gotten made fun of mercilessly. But I found it just short circuited everyone's like thoughts on names, and they would just be like, huh, okay, whatever, man. And they would just kind of call me some version like YF a lot, or like, eventually people I became better friends with would say Wythe, but I never really got made fun of. But the other thing it did is I never got a nickname. Like no one ever bothered nicknaming me because my name was so odd. The spelling, the teachers would say it wrong. They would say YF, and then some kid would be like, actually, man, it was Wythe. And then we would, it sort of became a thing where like I was nicknameless, and I sort of actually had nickname envy. I do remember at one point in college, one of my older brother's friends said, why don't we try whiskers? Because I've always had like some kind of mustache. And I thought that was great, but everyone else hated it. There was one guy, one of my brother's friends and me were like, yeah, I'm Whiskers Marshall. And they were like, that is the name you give a hamster. Like, it's just not a name for an adult human. So sorry to all the people named Whiskers out there, but it didn't stick. It was about a week.
I'm sorry that you've never had the experience of it. As somebody who was a youth worker for years, I was a classic nickname giver, even in normal names, just because it makes remembering the names of 200 to 400 people a whole lot easier if you've just renamed every single one of them. It also makes it really easy to hide. I don't actually know what your name is, and I'm going to call you whatever I've decided to in the moment. So awesome. Well, super excited to dive in. For folks who are just joining us, tell us a little bit about, let's not start with the jam. Let's start with the system. What is the grit system in like 30 seconds? And let's have maybe Wythe, you cover that. And then Tony, if you can tell us after that a little bit about some of the different games that it currently powers.
Yeah, sure. So the grid system, we like to say it's a modernist system. I think it's a little bit similar in terms of powering, fantasy adventure tabletop role playing games to something like a Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark. Our system uses scores our dice. So if you've played Kids on Bikes, we came up with it around the same time. So basically, whatever you're doing, you're rolling one die, and you're usually trying to get a high number. I guess you could make a roll under version. Let's see if people do in the jam. But for us, you're usually trying to hit a 6, and because you have different dice, you have a different likelihood. So depending on what you're trying to do, pretty elegant there. You also have a resource called Grit you can burn to boost your rolls. And because Grit is used both for that core mechanic of like, I really want to make this roll, so I'm going to spend energy, basically my limited amount per day, whatever game we're in, whatever simulationist adventure RPG, you have so much Grit. You also use grit for powers. So whatever your special powers are, they're going to cost grit. So there's a bit of a tension or a gambling mechanic where like every time you roll, you could just say, I hope I get a 6 on a d6 or a d8 or whatever, or I'm going to burn grit, or nah, I mean, I need to use like a special power here. So it puts a lot of agency in players' hands right away without a lot of math, which we really liked. And we found pretty early on it lets us tell stories in different genres, which Tony will touch on in Tony/Anthony/Tonio Cabonio. We'll touch on talking about the games. But yeah, that's, I mean, that in a sense, what we've tried to do is construct games where there are narrative structures. There's ways of playing the game that use different cool powers that cost grit. At the same time, there's a very simple base underlying system anyone can learn. It's no more complicated than D20 or 2D6 systems. I think it's in that same world of kind of the OSR, NSR, like what could we do that's less crunchy than D&D, but still allows for epic long-term play if you want that.
Awesome. Love it. Tony, tell us a little about some of the games that are currently powered by what Grit does.
Yeah, so our kind of premier sci-fi game, the one that I think started it all for Wythe, Stillfleet, is our big sci-fi game. As far as the way the grid system powers that, I think unique to the other ones, a lot of the powers there help dictate the kind of void miner you are. So you work for the company, you are a worker for this company, and a large part of the game is figuring out whether or not you like that. Spoiler, you don't like that. But the powers in that specific game are tailored around the kind of void miner you are and the job and the tasks you've been given. There's also the weird, so the powers also facilitate doing some of the stranger, more eldritch or magical parts of the sci-fi bits in Stillfleet. Second to that is the game that I brought to Wythe and he helped me put together. It was Blister Critters. That's my baby. It's the world's best Saturday morning cartoon TTRPG. And in that game, the powers dictate the kind of mutations you take on as an animal. So in Blister Critters, there are 4 paths you can take. The kind of fighty, the brawler, the chatter, which is the kind of talkative bard character. There's the dasher, which is basically Sonic, and the thinker, who gets like crafty powers or more telekinetic powers. So in Blister Critters, your powers dictate the kind of weird mutations that you take on. Following right after that was Danse Macabre, which is our historical medieval horror game that we just wrapped production and printing and everything else on. It's been quite a journey. But in that game, the powers actually take a quite significantly different role, I think, in that they're much lower powered, where in both Blister Critters and Stillfleet, the powers are very narrative and offer like very high impact. But in Danse Macabre, the goal is actually for them to feel smaller in scope and scale to reflect you being, a peasant that continuously dies and dies and dies and dies. But the power scaling in that game is meant to feel a lot lower. So those powers aren't as high impact or as wacky as in Blister Critters, where they're intentionally kind of set to the extreme to reflect the cartooniness. And then the fourth pillar, so far, we've made a bunch of other games that I could ramble about. But the fourth pillar being our high fantasy, kind of quirky portal fantasy world of the Sometimes Kingdom that we put out not that long ago, where that game actually, set aside from the lower power fantasy world of Danse Macabre, is intentionally a bit more metaphysical and kind of kooky in the way that the powers are expressed, brings it closer to the narrative focus of a Stillfleet or a Blister Critters. I think that was a long, rambly way to say that all the powers span a pretty wide spectrum from really wacky to wacky, but really narratively empowering to it lets you swing the sword harder, and that's cool too. Underlying all of that, and that'll be my final point, is the core dice rolling is all the same. So across each of the games, even if the power feel and the game feel is the same, your scores are different dice. You try to beat 6, and you make cool shit happen.
Love it. Awesome. I'm excited to dive in, and we are going to, in just a little bit, dive into actually building a power together and kind of lensing it through those systems so people can see that. There's a couple reasons for that, but number one is I want to show off, like, I think how easy it is to kind of work with the system, how flexible it is, and the way that y'all are making intentional choices in how the design process is working, and what it might look like in some of those different settings. We may not hit all of them, but at least hitting a couple of them, I think, would be great. If you're watching and have an idea for a power that you would love to see across those settings, feel free to drop that in to the chat, and we'll talk about that or come up with an idea on our own. But I want to talk first a little bit about what the jam is, what the invitation was, and maybe some of what surprised y'all along the way. So, Wythe, as we kind of dive in, tell us a little bit about the Grit System Jam and what some of your hopes and invitation were for it.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Tony and I and the team, created Stillfleet and Blister Critters and Das Macabre in these games, and it took a while to get to the point where we felt like it was on our to-do list, but we wanted to publish an SRD, a system reference document, something that people could use to make their own games using the Grit system, because we felt it was fun. But I think because it is at heart about narrative design, it's about storytelling, narrative structures. While the base system is very simple, it's like, what is an SRD for something like that? It's like Powered by the Apocalypse. I mean, it really depends on what is your idea. That's going to radically change kind of most of what the game is. Otherwise, you're just rolling a die trying to get a 6 or better. So it's like, on the one hand, very simple. On the other hand, it can go kind of in a big direction. By this summer, coming into the summer, so we published, I should say, also a Picaro, Early Modern Fantasy Roleplay, the Grit System Edition with a +1 experience. So it's part of the any award-winning RPG Zine Club Year 2. So congrats again, Tony.
Congrats to all of us.
I love Zine
Good
Club.
job, Hodag. It was all thanks to you. You brought it all home.
Hodag's great. No, big shout out to Hodag. So that was a fun one, and working with you all was super smooth. And that was an example of, okay, the system again has legs. We're able to work with other folks, bring it to different formats. A smaller game, a one-off. And by this summer, we had a number of games out and more to come. And we have an announcement, I think, today about yet another. So we felt like, not just let's tell people more that we have the SRD. Let's kind of market a free resource, but let's actually have a jam and sort of celebrate it and really kick the tires and see what other folks do. That was, I think, a major driver. Was every time we have made games together, we have changed a lot about the system, even though the core bits, rolling, trying to get a 6, burning grit, I mean, none of that has had to change, and it's worked kind of across genres. It's worked at different scales. Am I a mech? Am I a mouse? But we thought, well, what if other people want to do other things with it? I mean, let's just open it up. Just be very clear. There's a commercial-friendly third-party license, similar to other systems, right? If you want to make Borg content, you can just slap on their little, hey, this is kind of compatible with more Borg. The same with the Grit system. It's compatible with Grit. We're not going to, you don't owe us money. Go nuts. And we felt like a jam was the perfect way to sort of encourage that and just see what the response is and have one webpage in a way where you can go and find the results, right? So it's, at least for us, we like itch game jams, and we've participated in several. And I know, Tony, you've helped run several. And so we thought, this is what we're going to do. We're going to launch our first big game jam. We did one actually for Blister Critters, for settings for Blister Critters, sort of 2-page. Just tell us about, a location in an urban or suburban, area where these mutant animals are congregating. And we had great, really fun submissions. So we thought, when we open up everything we've done and just say, go to town, we will get even more sort of weird, strange, creative energy coming in. And it looks like, although we still are a week out, we have extended the jam, so there's more time. I do think we're getting, as we were talking about right before going live, not only good submissions, but quite in-depth submissions that are longer than I would have thought for a game jam. And they're really reflective of people saying, I'm trusting this system to do something with a fairly big idea or a fairly big world. So I'm sort of honored by that. And I'm also a little surprised, because I thought, given it's a game jam, we're not the biggest company, maybe we'll get a lot of sort of one-pagers, which would be totally fine. But it's great to see like 30-page, 60-page games coming in. So that was really like a shock. Like, people are reading, they're coming up with a lot of ideas, and they've read through everything in the SRD. They've read through the existing games, right?
Yeah, it's been really cool to see how wildly different each of the games are. I have them popped up on the screen next to us, but there's, everything from like Perplexity, which is this like anime inspired kind of over the top TTRPG, Sedition Press by Omzi from Gather Around Games, which is a very different, way more grounded tone to it. And then again, shout out to Hodag for Strike Masters of Sebastra, also too. Just again, very very different games that I feel like are picking up on a lot of the themes y'all are driving forward and doing something distinctive with them. Tony, how about you? Any particular like things that surprised you as the jam started?
I think it's largely the same as Wythe. I was expecting folks to make a smattering of small things like two pagers. Many of the games have a bunch of rules that are quite modular. So for in my what I was expecting was that people will make a batch of animals for blister critters. An animal in blister critters is just two powers and the kind of animal it is. So like that's an easy one to slot in, or the powers are really simple to write for any of the games. And so like Wythe, I think I've just been surprised that people are making full games. I've been able to playtest a couple of them on our Discord, which has actually been a lot of fun to see other people take the system and run with it. I playtested Tag, which is one of the submissions that's also a post-apocalypse, but specifically around like the kids game Tag, and there's this like infectious virus and it's post-apocalypse and there's different playground settings and worlds that people come from. That was a ton of fun, super fleshed out. I also play tested. There's a full-on like Jurassic Park, Dinosaur Island, 1989, that our collaborator Michael put together, which again is a full playable like Jurassic Park movie in the grid system, and it's phenomenal. So I think beyond being surprised at the fact that people aren't just making small stuff, I think it's how comfortable and willing people are to take the system on. And I think in a couple of cases, via the Discord, people have said they've just taken games that they kind of wrote at some point, never really got around to figuring them out, saw the grid system and went, I'm just going to, because this works and because I like the way that this is set up, I'm going to port it over and just go the extra 10% and then submit it. And that's been a cool feeling as well.
Yeah. No, it's been really cool to see the response. I remember when we did the Together We Jam for the first time, I expected a lot of like people will do a dungeon or create a power set or do something. And again, we were getting like full on 40-page hacks of like a game, or just 12-page or 8-page ones, right? But these very full kind of systematized concepts where people were like, oh, this is giving me an excuse to do a thing I've always wanted to do. I'm going to pick it up and do it. And like I said, it's been really cool to see that. I think some of that happens when it's like you have a big designer culture around what you do, which I think both Stillfleet and Plus One like have a lot of friends who are designers. It's been a lot of time with other designers who do that, as opposed to it being like, oh, like it's, you know, even like for more folks, I think a great example of you get a lot of very connected adventures or small content that people are like, I just made this one thing to go into a normal Morkborg campaign and just to drop it in. But you'll also get kind of wild, bigger things as well. So it's always interesting to see. And again, really excited to see kind of the creativity of people, how fully fleshed things are coming out, and the fact that people are actually getting a chance to like play test them, run them together, and the community y'all have created around it, I think is incredibly exciting. So, but yeah, like I think my assumption, because we talked a lot as y'all were getting ready to launch the jam, was that you would get some like a lot more smaller pieces, and so far y'all got, I think, none. like people have added things to their own games also too, but for the most part it's been, hey, I'm making an entire game, not diving into something that already exists, or again, like you said, creating some new animals for Blister Critic or a new faction for something like that. So today I wanted to spend some time talking about how easy the system is to work with, and so I pitched to y'all right before we went live, what if we designed some stuff live on air? We kind of talked about a power kind of being a great place to start. And I think for me, it's also showing some of the lensing at work, because I think anytime someone hears, oh, here's a system people are doing a lot with, we get kind of like the universal system response of like, oh, but like with PBTA, like with Together We Go, Grid again has a philosophical underpinning that is doing something very tight mechanically that makes it easy to kind of lens and relens. And again, I'd point people, if they want more in-depth conversation about that, though I'm sure we'll hit some of it, to go watch the conversation that Wythe and I did earlier this year as we kind of dived into some of the leftist roots and ideology behind the system design you're trying to do. So We do have a chat from Hex in the out there saying after playing Dinosaur Island, they couldn't believe how much it's fully designed for campaign play. Also, too, like so that people are dropping these fully fleshed out, fully formed things. But I think it would be fun to dive in again with looking at something and looking at how we lens it through a couple of the systems that are in place. So, like I said, we settled on a power because, from my perspective, I think that gives us a mix of like some of the things that build up to a class, but it's a little bit more complex than just necessarily designing an island. Though the item design complexity for some games can get pretty sharp also too. So we didn't establish what that power was going to be though. So this is the point where we start talking through that and figuring out what we're going to design. Unless y'all have any more observations before we jump over to that.
No, just shout out to Michael J. Cohen for Dinosaur Island. And I do think Michael has a great grasp of cinematic kind of experience at the table and the difference between movies and TTRPGs, but they share that, to me, sort of sense of adventure, like a classic 80s action or sort of Spielbergian, movie. And I think Dinosaur Island is one of these mini games like Tag, Perplexity. We're getting using the system where I think people are capturing a spirit of adventure that, yeah, again, Tony and I weren't necessarily spending any time on. So it's cool to see how in different genres, like for example in that one, because it's a certain franchise of dinosaur movie that we're obviously talking about that has like multiple iterations. Michael's thought through what happens after the first movie, right? So how do you kind of keep it going and have it feel like we have to come back to Dinosaur Island? So again, I think thinking through that is an example of Tony, to what you're getting at, like narrative structure and how we've tried to set up the games as having some pretty specific way to start in a world that still feels very, very open, as open as anything, but the lens is a little more specific as opposed to a kind of BX clone where it's like a bunch of dusty travelers meet in a tavern to go slay goblins or do whatever. There's no real narrative structure. For us, it's like, let's start with some specific, interesting cinematic, inciting incident. And then from there, can we make it really open? Can we make it campaignable? So there's actually a tension there. And I think that's been fun for us to explore. So yeah, very happy to talk about powers and how I do agree. I think powers are kind of core to it because as our system, at least the way it's designed, is everything at the end of the day is just a power. There's a kind of flat hierarchy of classes are groups of powers. Enemies are groups of powers. Whatever, an item really could just be a power or multiple powers associated with an object. So I think designing those from how we design things, that is how we design everything, right? Is basically bullet points.
I picked it up. Yes. Awesome. Well, I've dropped a Google Doc in for us all to look at. And again, since we're thinking about like designing this across a couple different systems and kind of talking through that, I kind of want to default to y'all a little bit. Again, unless like Hex, if you or someone watching has an idea, this is a great time to toss them out in the chat. But like, how do we start by picking a power that we think, again, can exist within the scale of that? Like I threw out, we were talking to this, I was like fireball or toothpick of death if we're doing an item, right? But like the reality is I wanted to throw out things that I was like, oh, would that fit in blister critters? But also could it be found in Stillfleet, right? And theoretically, both of those things I think could have some sort of import into those, while still showing up in a number of other systems. But like, let's talk about it. Like when you're designing a power, or as we're looking at designing this power specifically, like what is a good starting point that you think we can look at for scale? And I think it can be tropey if we need it to be. I think sometimes that's the easiest way for everybody to understand how simple this will be for it to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be an easy example, either of the ones you gave. Like we've been working on some fantasy content, and I tried to make a list of the 100 most common fantasy spells, and obviously Fireball's on that list. So I wrote one called Inferno Orb, and then it's just a very simple at that point math question of like roughly how much damage does it do, and the more damage it does, it costs more grit because it is using more etheric energy or whatever, right? In whatever game you're playing, let's assume it's sort of completely vanilla fantasy. There's some sympathetic magic rule about like the more you change the world, the greater the sacrifice or the cost or something like that. So I think having kind of powerful things cost more grit is kind of a no-brainer. In terms of what the specific numbers are, it generally I start with Stillfleet, and Blister Critters is fairly similar, I would say, in scale. Some of the other games have gone up or down in terms of sort of epic numbers crunching, or trying to simplify and say, let's keep it really low to the ground, more OSR in style. But for Stillfleet, you might have 20 health to start, 20 grit, something around there. So if you have a spell like power, either it's an item like a Molotov cocktail, or it's a psionic blast that does 3d6 damage, like a classic D&D fireball, that's a lot. Like that could kill a weaker character in one hit. It could certainly harm someone who's very powerful. And there's many ways to tweak that and say, it ignores armor. Maybe it does more damage against certain opponents. So just like other games, I mean, I think the actual numbers aren't that different, and it's not hard to design for. In terms of the grit economy, that again, I would look at, are you using the kind of base rules, which are kind of built on Stillfleet? So you start with, again, somewhere between 14 and 22 grit, or are you changing that radically? So if you start with way less grit and it costs 10 grit to use, it might be the only thing you can do all day. And that's going to make playing that character feel like my character has one power. I throw Molotov cocktails, they're huge. It's like anime, like giant bomb. And that's all I can do. Or if it costs like 2 grit, but it doesn't do a ton of damage, I'm going to use that kind of as my base, like cool combat thing in some other type of sci-fi adventure game. So I don't know if that answers the question in terms of like how I would take a tropey power and break it down using our system. But
yeah,
I usually do start with basically one of two ways. And maybe Tony, Grasso, you have more thoughts on this, but for me, a lot of it is tropey power. Like I know I want a power that lets someone steal something or disappear or convince someone of something. Or actually, even those I just named, I'll start with, I want a narrative scene. And that's how I prefer to design. And I think a lot about Aaron King's hard moves. And I think Tony, you and I talked about this on the stream last time we were talking about what is the narrative impact that a power is going to have. And then in a way, the mechanics, again, are subordinate to that. And again, if it's a huge narrative impact, well, it should cost more grit. It's going to really change the scene. If it's a minor narrative impact and it's momentary, it can be cheaper and you could do it more often. So I think there's two ways to kind of think, like tropey existing. Okay, the fighter is good at fighting. What is a power that reflects that in the combat, epicycle, the combat system, or a narrative moment where the thief is good at lying and convinces everyone of a lie. How do I want to kind of write that within this game, this narrative structure, and how do I want to price that within this grid economy?
Well, let's dive into an example then, but also Hexagon again in chat tosses out, hear me out, beam of collateral damage. You spin grit to make it do less damage. So, I love it. So kind of living within tropey space. Let's talk about if I wanted to speak with dead in different grit systems. Like that's because I think that one can show up some of the narrative like heft of what this can do and how that might look differently as we frame it through. So if we were going to start with something that let us speak with dead in Stillfleet, right? Like what would that look like within the practicalities of the world before we dive into the mechanical underpinnings of it?
Yeah, I mean, for Stillfleet, because there is an optional psionic system, the Hell Science, you could say it is essentially magic, right? It is our brains have evolved, and we can now reach backward in time in a kind of Vanagudian way and speak with the dead that way. However, you could also say there's a hard SF explanation, which is you command nanites that go into some sort of material reference. There has to be something left. And this might be a constraint on the power. There has to be something tied materially. Is it a hard drive? Is it a body? Whatever, that lets advanced computational modeling happen. And you get an in silico version of a dead person that you're speaking with who seems like they're alive. They might even think they're alive, but they are a brain in a, they're a philosophical zombie, a brain in a vat, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually, again, one of the strengths of Stillfleet is it was designed to, in a way, service hard SF as well as soft as goop, ice cream kind of SF, where it really is more Eldritch, is more Lovecraftian, and it's bringing in those other themes, cosmic fantasy themes. So I think I would start with that, and maybe one in the hard science fictional world, it maybe costs more grit and has a constraint, whereas actually in a sort of high psionic version, it's not the most important power. It's a more narrative, like investigational power.
And would you use it, like, would you just establish like, oh, hey, here's the power, it lets you do X, Y, and Z. If you're doing this, do this. If you're doing this, do this. Or would you design two separate abilities based on the specific flavor you were looking at?
That's a great question. I think in Stillfleet, if this was actually for Stillfleet, I would really try to be intentional about avoiding what's called elegant variation in writing, where you
Right.
have two ideas that are similar, and that's actually bad. You want to pick the best version. So I would say in Stillfleet, okay, let me think, where is the direction of the game going? So we're working on Stillfleet 2 now, Tony and and I would say, are we trying to make it feel more hard sci-fi, or are we trying to really lean into cosmic fantasy? And people love fantasy, so okay, you can just sort of think hard and commune with the dead. And I think that's a choice about the higher level like product and brand in a sense, as well as obviously just picking one thing for a game book. Now, in a different game, maybe you do want some kind of elegant variation. You want lots of powers for some reason. I could imagine like thinking of Strike Masters with Subastra, like you want lots of kinds of martial arts moves just because that's fun. But I think with something like Speaking with the Dead, it seems very eerie and kind of a big deal on the level of like, wait, you know that's kind of defining the world through the power.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably be very intentional about something like that, where one power says, "Oh wow, I can speak with the dead. Like I didn't know I could do that in this game universe."
Right. Because it's saying something about, no matter what, it's saying about something about the cosmology of the world you're playing, and also too like that choice of that power is enabling or opening or closing different doors. So if we were to then to say, okay, cool, we're going to go the hard science route, right? Like we're going to live with some of these limitations. We want to keep things a little bit more grounded. We're not trying to go cosmic fantasy route. What are some of the other questions that you would ask if you were designing this for like a hard science version of Stillfleet?
I'm curious what Tony Grasso thinks. For me, I think I used to think a little more coming from really D20 and Traveler and that kind of design. It's like, okay, what is the range, effect, duration, like those things. Now I think much more Powered by the Apocalypse. Like I think I write a little scene, or just really try to keep it very short and leave it open to players to interpret. Like it has one requirement: you need something from the dead person that the nanites can actually interact with to gain some information and reverse that entropy. Right, to create the model, they need information. Where does that information come from? So I'd probably lean into like a cyberpunk vibe a little bit, but I will say with Stillfleet, we try to go pretty hard biopunk and specifically kind of nanite blood punk. So I think we have a certain way that Stillfleet powers are worded that cues up that world through the power. So even if it's a short bullet, and again, I'm trying to do this better for Stillfleet too, keep it short, but use certain keywords so that the reader, maybe especially the new reader, is like, oh, weird, like that's a different version of this trope than what I've seen. So I would probably say something like, name of power, the time, and then like you have a swarm of nanites that lets you, create a model of a dead person to ask them questions, burn X grit. You can talk to them for, Y minutes, whatever. And then I would just figure out the numbers, right? And if it needs more, we can always add more. Some of that comes through playtesting. But I do think if you can keep a power to a couple sentences, unless you're trying to write a game more PBTA style, you have more descriptive, evocative scenes, that's fine too. But I think for some of the more fantasy adventure games where there's going to be a lot of powers listed, we've gone in the direction of, like for Stillfleet specifically, okay, if we're going to give you 20 options, then we're going to keep them short so you can scan them easily, right?
Love it. Awesome. Tony, Tony, what are your thoughts on that? If you were speaking with the dead, and you were looking at that for Stillfleet specifically, like what would your approach or questions you would be asking be?
I guess I think two things. I think even when I run Stillfleet, I do lean closer to the goopier side of things. I think that's why I like making stuff for blister critters, and that it is a bit more loose. And so I think I would keep it in the world. I wouldn't want it to fall outside the realm of it being Stillfleet. But I think I would have fun, and I think it's something that Wythe and I do a lot when we're writing the powers, is how we can write them to create that scene. And so rather than the strict mechanical limitations, would there be fun conversational limitations that we could place on it? If it is something that you can only say in a certain way, I think the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm bleeding over to how I would do it in Blister Critters. But I would try to have the power, I think, enforce some kind of creative, I think, or role play bit for the players, where like people, it's a conversation. What makes a conversation interesting? You're talking with the dead, which may or may not be more interesting given the setting, but how can I, as a writer or as a GM, make what is basically just a conversation with a different character,
Yeah.
something that feels larger or more unique. If it is unique, I would imagine in a game like Danse Macabre, everybody's dead. They died a whole bunch of times, so it might not be as dramatic. But in Stillfleet, I don't think it's something that happens that often. So what are ways that you could heighten that experience?
Yeah, I love that. Like as a GM, like my brain immediately goes to like, oh, when was this DNA sample from? Cool. They don't know anything from past that because this
Mm-hmm.
model that I'm building right now doesn't have that. So if this is like I went to their childhood home and found an old hairbrush keepsake, you might
Right.
be able to do it, but this is the child version of them that you are now speaking to as opposed to the adult version of them.
Something that I think could be fun in doing that is the nanites only know maybe what the brain knows, and if the brain has a specific version of that person as they saw themselves, you're talking to like a version of the dead body.
That's so great.
They died at 98, but you're talking to them because they remembered themselves as 35, or that's
Right.
maybe a sillier example, or they imagined themselves a warrior that lived through it all, but they were kind of just like a wimpy guy. I would have a lot of fun as a GM incorporating that into the way I ran it. As far as the power writing, that would probably come across in some bullets, or as short as we can maybe make it. Maybe down to the game, it would be a longer or shorter
Yeah.
bit of GM advice or guidance for constructing that moment. I think.
Hex throwing out, you speak with the dead, but all they want to talk about is baseball. Yeah, especially going in with your
Yeah.
like, hey, what is their inner dialogue? Like if suddenly like all those thoughts that they don't say are suddenly vocal because it is just root tapped into their brain, like their obsessions and self think like coming more to the forefront, and then
Yeah.
all those things
Mm-hmm.
could be like tremendously enjoyable to like put that between the power. And so I like I let's just immediately make that shift though. Like so speaking with dead in blister critters, like what are we looking at? How is that being driven for that?
I would immediately make it like in TV shows where a character that left a couple seasons ago gets to come back. And so there's like raucous applause for this actor that left. Or I was just telling why me and my girlfriend are watching through all of Degrassi, The Next Generation, which is like a continuation of the original Degrassi. So when those actors show up, I would make it something like that, where it was a prior character on this cartoon is making a reprised role. I think it would be something distinct from Stillfleet, where it would be different and unique, or it would be less frequent, I think, than at most other powers. But I don't know that it would be something um, that feels like a huge one-off. It'd be more in-world, it'd feel more welcome and familiar. It wouldn't be that strange, given
Mhm.
all the other things happening. And I think it would be up to the GM and the players. For Blister Critters, there's a spectrum of zany, which is like super cartoony, like Ren and Stimpy, to gnarly, which is more like Redwall, or even like Watership Down is pretty far on the gnarly. So I think depending on where you fall in there, you can have it be that you're talking to like a reanimated, really mutated animal corpse, and that's kind of creepy, and you can really lean into that. But if you're playing like Ren and Stimpy, maybe it is just like a ghost on a stick that some puppeted hand is moving around. And again, specifically for Blister Critters, more of my stipulations in the power would be conversational. Would be like, what do they remember? Are they even able to communicate? Have they gone feral in their death in some way? Do they not speak uh, common
Yeah.
anymore? That really isn't discussed in Blister Critters, but that would be my focus more than how are they doing it. The assumption would be you can talk to the dead. Don't worry. Spend however much grit, and you can talk to a ghost. So that wouldn't be my consideration. My consideration for Blister Critters, because the world is way more cartoony and there's more leniency for that, it would be what are the cool limitations to make the moment feel fresh whenever
Mhm.
it would come up.
Yeah, but you also mentioned the other dimension, which is the meta dimension of Blister Critters, that it is a TV show, which we've
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of fun and I think can be leaned into more broadly. I think this is maybe underused in general in games, and I think a lot of story games do hit on this in some of the work, again in RPG Scene Club. But because it's meant to be a TV show, like I was thinking, instead of someone who's died and come back, what if it's someone who's like canceled, right? Like this gets into like other tropes. So like
Yeah.
either for they are a terrible person, or they had a beef with the showrunner or whatever, and and then I thought of actually this power, speaking with the dead, gets used in the Odyssey. So there's, this is not a spoiler. The story's been around a few thousand years now, but Odysseus must speak with the dead in order to get home, and the dead also kind of command a price. So Tony, to some of the things you're saying, I think there would be a kind of transactional quality here that we didn't really talk about when we were talking about Stillfleet, where I think, at least in my mind, I think of Neuromancer and kind of the idea of speaking with like a digital imprint or something someone's left behind. But with Blister Critters, I think if it was literally a ghost or just an angry actor who lost their job and you've replaced them,
Yeah.
they're gonna maybe be able to help you in theory, but like why would they? Like you're gonna
Right.
have to convince them. And I think
Yeah.
that narrative scene, that scene is different than one about kind of hacking and what model,
Hmm.
like what information can I extract, how can I reverse entropy, whatever, and maybe I only have so much time, I only have so much data. I think this becomes a scene where there's a kind of contest between the producer, the GM, and the critters
Right.
around like, who is the person who's summoned. And I think that does feel actually all the way back. I mean, it feels like Homer had a similar power in his RPG that he wrote.
Yeah. Well, and I think that takes me naturally, like, because again, I want to hit like Dance Macabre is coming out. Like you haven't got it out, but yeah, as y'all talked about, and it's one of the reasons I like shifted to like Speak with Dead as being really interesting is that's a world where death is all around you. Like it is a common part of the world, and the power is significantly reduced as a way to help kind of reinforce that. So, what does this look a little bit more like in Dance Macabre?
I think in that sense, it is a question of whether someone is truly dead or falsely dead. So, in the world of Danse Macabre, medieval horror role playing by Christopher Pickett and Stillfleet Studio, death stops working normally around the year 1360, and it is now the year 1390. So, there's been a sort of mutant zombie apocalypse, is how we gloss it. Cronenbergian body horror apocalypse. There's no magic, but if you die, you come back with maleficia, with mutations. And if you die too many times, you lose any sense of reason and you become a demoniac, a basically mutant zombie with just a bunch of mutant, tentacles and who knows what else. And depending on, the sort of justification is how you thought your body should be after death. Like that will kind of drive, like your superstitions, your fears will drive those mutations. So they'll look different in different regions, but everybody sort of eventually becomes a monster. So it's meant to be sort of like Berserk. It plays like that, like high lethality. So because everyone's dying a lot, if there was just false death, you wouldn't actually have that many dead people, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. However, in the game, there's also true death, which can happen in the light of quintessence. So that's a complete MacGuffin, something made before 1360 that humans cared about. A work of art, a building, whatever, can release quintessence when you sing near it. And it only has so much quintessence. It's a resource that goes away over time. People are trying to figure out, can we make more? But because of that, church choirs have become the kind of power centers of the remaining fortress city states. So it's a really interesting world where church choirs are kind of the spy agencies, and you, as a pilgrim, some sort of peasant who now has to do a dangerous adventure job, you're kind of working for the choir masters. And again, regardless of religion and all that. So I think because there is true death, there are people who are brought in the fortress city states who are allowed to die in the light of quintessence. And now there's a weekly choir, whatever, where the old, the infirm are able to die peacefully, and they've earned that by being good citizens, right? And you'd like to earn that by being a pilgrim. That does raise the question of, similar to the other games, can you go talk to those people?
Mhm.
And I think that moment actually is pretty big because there's so few actually dead people that like so many people are out there zombified, and you could kill them, but you would need a quintessent artifact, and it would be dangerous. So for the most part, the idea is a lot of demoniacs are kind of left alone to roam the wilds, and there's real choices that the remaining kind of polities around the world are making around whether they try to basically clear out zombies, right? And again, creates a lot of opportunity if you are a gig adventurer. So I think the idea of contacting someone who's truly died must, in that game, take on a kind of religious or spiritual significance. Again, regardless of what setting you're in, I think you would have to imbue it with that sense of you're interacting with really cosmic forces, and it should feel like a big deal.
Awesome. Yeah,
I would
I
also
also
say
even
that
want. Oh, Tony, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think anybody that experiences true death finally and gets brought back for
Would be
a
like
question about where
you.
like a magic sword is probably really pissed off. And so I say that jokingly, but I think specifically for Danse Macabre, if you are trying to contact somebody who finally was able to experience true death, I think that it would be maybe more so than the other games, more of a consideration of whether or not.
He'll be back. I believe in him.
I do as well.
You are messing with something you. Oh.
You pause there for a second.
Yeah, I was just saying I think it would be a larger consideration for people, a more moral or ethical question, perhaps maybe more so than blister critters or Stillfleet.
Yeah. I also think if I was a player, I would have a natural curiosity, and I think this is the kind of thing that play testing this type of power would source a little bit. If I was a player and I had the ability to speak with the dead, right? Like there would be using this with somebody who's truly died. Like that does feel like a big thing. That does feel like I'm interrupting. I mean, like regardless of all the other issues with Joss Whedon, and spoilers for a decades old TV show, when they jump from one network to another, Buffy has died and they bring Buffy back, and Buffy is like, they're like, oh man, they won't talk, they're so upset, it's probably because they're in a hell dimension. And it's like, no, that's not, they were in heaven and you fucking ripped them back to life and they're depressed now, is a huge artifact for the season where they jump networks. That is such a great turn on all that. Like, and so like that's huge. But I also, like, as a player would be like, cool, what happens if I try to speak to one of these like demons or like demon zombies who like is no longer cognizant or responding or anything else like that? Like, am I able to use this power to break through to them? Becomes a natural question also too. Like, even though these are two different types of death, like, can I have a moment of saliency with one of these, like, like horrific beings, right?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And the answer might be no, you can't. And the answer might be yes, you can if you spend this much grit, right? Like there are ways that you can, I think, sort that out within the power itself. And again, that might come up at the table, but in playtesting it for that setting specifically, it feels like, yeah, players are going to try to use this both ways, and the answer of like, does it work, and if so, how, I think is great.
Yeah, that actually did happen a lot with, and I believe continues to happen with Danse Macabre, is players are very inventive around the logic of the Cronenbergian apocalypse. So they're always kind of like, okay, we kill the demoniac, they're going to come back. What if we chop up their body into little bits? And so then they come back as lots of little guys. They're a swarm of homunculi. So there's rules for that, or homuncule in French. And they, that's like not necessarily better for you. You've created
Right.
a lot of little opponents. And I think this is a similar instance of like, if you try to speak with them, they're not technically dead, but maybe to your point, you burn grit, or it's two different powers.
Mm-hmm.
Or that's actually maybe, I think, to me, it's just more interesting to have in Danse Macabre, there is no speak with dead. There's just create reason temporarily for demoniac, which is, to the example of Buffy, which is, I think, a good one. That's almost the opposite. It's like someone who is in a sort of hellish, wild state. They're sort of animalistic, and then they're brought back to being their human self, and it's temporary. And how do you do they know that it's temporary? Do you lie to them? Like, that feels again like that moment in the Odyssey where there's a real trade-off around, what do I tell the angry dead, an army of angry dead who feel I've screwed them over, you know what I mean? But I need to get home. I need to get some information from them. And I think there's something interesting with the idea that, a demoniac might have a reason to help you, and they might understand your plight, and they might want people on Earth to not be eaten by mutant zombies. But they are also maybe going to be mad if you're like, wait, this is just temporary. You've restored me to consciousness, but only briefly. So I think that as a scene is like, whoa, that's like a humdinger,
Yeah. All right. Only because we've talked about it, I'm going to throw a total curveball at you. You got to create Speak with Dead and Dinosaur Island 1989. What do you think? What are you thinking about as you're approaching it?
My character that I play tested died in a blaze of glory. I was chomped by a T-Rex, saving the rest of the party as kind of the final scene, the final act of our playtest session. I don't know. I'll leave it up to Michael whether you can talk to the dead dinosaurs. I think I think to some degree that's largely what Jurassic Park is. But I think maybe it would be too goofy, but I always view it through a goofier lens. But I think I would do it Farquaad style, where it's just Tony in the belly of the T-Rex, still alive, not digested. And Michael actually wrote a bunch of really cool, I think he called it advanced gear, where like you unlock the ability to use them at a certain level. I would offer something like that, some kind of ultrasound thing to put up to the T-Rex belly, to commune with the half-eaten Tony.
I love that. I would do DNA biopunk thing, but I love also that the person has been swallowed whole and is just being digested slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. In my mind, it feel like I'm trying to think if slash how often this happens, but I feel like uh, a normal trope for like the Jurassic vibes is also like, oh, we found a video of like some, or we found someone's notes, or we found like, so like I would probably relens this as like my grandfather's archives or something like that, where
Yeah.
it is like,
Yeah.
it is, this is not a literal talking to the dead, but I can spend grit and time to look through like the archives and try to find something relative to the current situation. Because it lets you have kind of fun like little narrative beats of them saying some things. It maybe lets you as a GM do a little bit of extra world building, like very subtly in the background. You can mess with whether they're corrupted or not also too. Like I think there's all kinds of fun stuff there, but that world is very driven by the data from the past along with DNA from the past also too. And so um Hexagon says, "Oh yeah, it's got to be advanced gear because then we get to sell another toy," which is an excellent
Yeah.
note also too.
We get to
So,
sell the branded composition book. That is the thing they find. So yeah, I completely agree. That is the best version for Dinosaur Island. Is you find the cassette or notebook or whatever that has the answers.
yeah. And then we've got an ARG that we've launched around that for as a marketing scheme for the movie. You know, um, excellent. So awesome. This has been, like I said, I really wanted to take some time, like as people are like picking up these big things, and I think anytime people are doing a jam, like there's a tendency to be like, okay, cool, I have to do this whole thing, right? I would say if people are out there sitting right now, like my advice would be like pick a couple powers, like exactly what we were talking about at the beginning, like. If you have an idea for something that connects to an already existing game, great. Like pick it up and do a little bit around that. Create an animal, create a power set, like add something in. Look at other people's games that have been created in the jam. Because do this, take a single power or a single item and relens it for 3 or 4 different things, or just create one single standalone element that you're really excited about and would want to sit down at a table and play. I think when we have jams, it's part of the reason for the hard moves jam that we're just like, create a single move. If you create a ton of them, that's great. But like creating a power or a item, I think is a great way to engage in the grit system jam. And y'all have really lensed some of the judging process to like honor that as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I mean that's also credit to you as well, Tony, helping us think through this, and our great judges, whom we should shout out just because they're lovely and they're
Do it.
going to do some level of work here. So Lauren Blanco from Studio Blanco, Mystic Ether, and of course 20 Sided Store in Brooklyn, New York, my old favorite friend of the local game store. Kayla Dice, who's made a bunch of cool games. I love Psycho Dungeon, Transgender Deathmatch Legend 2, a bunch of stuff. Daniel Kwan, who is Asians Represent and has written a bunch of sort of 5e things, as well as a PoE game that y'all are publishing,
Wandering Blades will come
Blades.
out later this year.
Very excited to actually. I'd love to have Daniel on. Maybe
Yeah.
Tony, you can play or suggest someone to come play with us if people are around, and we can make it happen on Why We
For
Roll.
sure.
Our buddy Sam Sorensen from NYU and many other places, and I think has worked with Tuesday Night. But Sam has a game called Cataphracts that's blowing up, which is really like a online massive multiplayer board game set in the year 800 where you go fight each other in armies and keep track of armies. And Arthur Wells, who did the Picaro AP, who's just lovely human, and they're really fun and funny, and also design games. So we have 5 guest judges, and in conversation with Plus One, we decided the categories are best new power. So building on this conversation, what is one power for any game using the grid system? Weirdest new item. So again, your other suggestion there, one cool new item using these rules, and both those, would still be awarded prizes and such. Best character sheet design. I thought that was a fun one that I think Daniel had suggested, where the idea being that a character sheet can drive so much very quickly about a player's comprehension of like, what is this game, and a GM, frankly, like, what am I GMing? Like, what is happening in the game? So I think that was a great idea. Most useful mechanical addition. So that's kind of any single rule. I think the idea being beyond a new power, a new item, like, okay, I'm going to make my magic system and use the grid system to interact with it or fuel it, something like that, right? Best visual design. So the bigger 3 in terms of the prizes, right, are visual design, creative writing, and overall. So visual design, in conversation with you, we decided to merge all aspects of visuals, so people have different access to art resources. editing, online editing software, things like that.
I had
So,
to fight that fight again this year for Appendix and Jam,
oh, great.
but successfully. And
Oh,
so
good, good. Yeah, we love Appendix Jam, and Tony and I did submit to that as well. And that was a lot of fun to
and
work
there's
on
I
a
think there's a
system
couple of
agnostic.
I think there's a it's really weird because I think there's some people who made grit things for there. Maybe it was just y'all that I'm thinking of. That like I don't know that have been submitted here, so I may just be thinking of y'all also
I
too.
hope I hope people do submit to multiple. I mean, that's fine with us. But yeah, and then creative writing, I'd love to see. Just there's already so much good writing, and again, we're not judging, and I know that the jam hasn't closed, so and I have not read every page of everything, but there's so much good stuff. I've really been blown away, and just because we know we're friends, but like Amzi's Sedition Press like hack of Picaro, I
Mhm.
think is such a great, so this is a person who's a professor of print and knows a lot about the history of print, and so made an early modern game where printing is magic and it's about ink and paper, and it's so good if you work as we do in like arguing with printers about ink and paper and kind of designing books. It's such a fun hack of a game that I was thinking would be like Don Quixote. You have like a gun and a sword and you're like getting in fights, and this game is totally different. It's about information and politics, and in the sense of these things are about ultimately sort of press and whatnot. So again, blown away by that. And then best overall entry is going to be the ultimate prize, where we're going to offer to publish, some version as a physical zine. And we would love to maybe publish a lot of this, but some of it just comes down to we're a tiny company, right? But
Mhm.
at least the best overall entry, we do want to be able to see that in print, and especially, I mean, again, if it's someone who's like never seen any of their other work in print, I think that'll be really amazing. Whoever it is, it's going to be up to the judges. I'd love to sort of work with them and just showcase, like, hey, this is also what the grid system can be beyond the things that we've made.
Amzi just chimed in. It's me. When I was showing it on screen, it is you. It's a absolutely great entry into the jam. Also, too. Yeah, I'm so excited about like all the different things that have come out of this. I'm always blown away by how deep people will like get into exploring these things, kind of as we talked about. But I again really want to encourage people, if you've been sitting on this, if you're like, there's only 1 week left. Man, all I've done is design a couple powers. Go ahead and submit it anyways. Because here's the other thing: while like there's a jam timeline, once something's submitted, like if you do more with it later, like that's great. Like pick it up and do more with it later. But one of the great things about digital releases, about zines, and about RPGs generally, like Wythe, you were just talking about getting ready for Stillfleet 2. Releasing a game is not the end of that game's life. It doesn't mean it can't grow and change. It doesn't mean that more won't come of it later. Like getting something out and taking that step to put it out, I think is such a huge step, and really want to encourage more folks to do. So we've got one more announcement we're going to talk about here right at the very end, and that's that there's another game coming out. You wanna White? I'll let you kind of take the lead on this announcement.
Yeah, we're very excited to announce that yet another grid system game. Speaking of this system, but again, totally different take. There are unique rules. There's unique aspects. It is probably the lightest yet in a lot of ways. So very simple to engage with, but really endlessly reproducible. It's made for the kind of play where you'd come back to it again and again. And this is another sci-fi game, so close to my heart, but not by me. So we were approached by a writer who worked with us on Danse Macabre about a near future sci-fi game. The idea is very simple. Aliens visit Earth. They start to terraform it. Their structures are everywhere, filled with alien ecosystems. And then they very quickly realize, oh shit, humans are conscious, and they leave. And we don't ever see them. It all happens in a blink. They've changed our memories in some way. Who knows? Planes crash. The next day we wake up. There's been this kind of apocalypse, but the world continues, except now there are alien structures, giant living alien structures with a capital S in all over Earth at random, and they are full of stuff. Now, most of the stuff is useless and dangerous, but some of it might be worth a lot of money. Some of it is new technology, and there becomes a new job, which is basically licensed by various governments who don't want to really deal with the problem. You can be a delver, and this becomes also, we thought this would be really funny, a kind of streaming gig, right? A lot of people are doing this live on YouTube. They're going into alien structures, poking around, encountering entities, and trying to find doodads. So alien, what we call architect and Stillfleet, things that are sort of impossible to make by human standards at present, and bring them back and sell them. So it is a game about being a gig worker, being an influencer. It's a game about urban exploration and the insides of buildings, and it is a game ultimately about weird sci-fi stuff that is procedurally generated. The core rules are fantastic. They have great art by Tony Grasso and designed by Tony Grasso. The ideas are all by Konstantin Pradius, who worked with us on Danse Macabre on the Lithuania setting for that book, the Abandoned Lithuania setting. And yeah, we're excited that Plus One Experience is going to help us roll that out and add to sort of the catalog of grid system experiences. And I think this one, because of the intentionality around kind of an old school dungeon crawl vibe and Tony's great art, I do think it's going to be a really beautiful object that people are going to want to pick up and hopefully play, mess around with. Again, use, hack. You could bring a lot to it. You could, I think, actually use this with like the Stygian library. Do you know what I mean? Like you could,
Yeah.
Tephrotic Nightmares. I don't know. Pick your favorite like weird dungeon thing, and then bring it to New York City and a giant tower of like horrible alien flesh that you're like going to go inside of and poke around.
And Tony, if you want to drop some art in the chat, I'll pop it up on the screen so that people can see it. But one of the reasons I was excited about this one, in addition to like we're big fans of the grit system, wanted to help get this out into the world, and loving y'all and the creative work that you do. I am such a huge fan of the tower trope in like lit RPG, and to a less like to an equal degree, but not so much for this property, like the isekai tower trope, but also in just generally speaking in a lot of lit RPG, the trope of the alien tower that suddenly appears and changes everything for humanity and is now part of how humans have to, well, not have to, but it basically is going to rewire everything and change a lot of just kind of what we're up to. Oh great, Discord has decided to, well, my computer has decided to put Edge back as the default browser for some reason. That's always fun.
Everyone's favorite.
When everybody's favorite browser, Edge. Let me rework this real quick so folks can see it. But I am it is again one of my favorite tropes, and I don't know that I've seen a game hit it this cleanly before as just its general themes, but also like it is, I think, one of the most accessible forms of like science fiction to people who really love a dungeon delve, like is just this type of crawl. Tony, like you absolutely killed it on this. It's also doing so much to pull on all of the development that y'all have done in the grit system so far, and really kind of like I think streamlining those and making it an excellent game to onboard people to a number of the styles of play that it's up to. Because again, some of this is about like the tropiness of it, the familiarity of it, right? Like which lets you then enter into those more narratively rich questions that I think the system explores so very, very well. So Tony, like any thoughts from you on what you excited about, what you were thinking about as you were kind of bringing some of these visuals together?
It was really cool. I got a lot of like free reign to really kind of discover the world at the beginning of the process. There were a lot of conversations with Constantine and going over like different visual references and places to pull inspiration from. So it was cool to kind of blur the lines and pull my own stuff in there. The French comic Blam was one of the ones that Constantine really wanted to pull from, as well as different color schemes and line work focuses from like Mobius and that kind of thing. I think in a prior conversation I had said that I also pulled a lot of inspiration, maybe ironically, from the two most recent Legend of Zelda games. That are in their own way sort of sci-fi adjacent, but at least like visually, I had a lot of fun pulling in some of that visual language and really getting to explore. And then I think on a layout graphic design level, it was cool to design in a horizontal layout, which is something that I hadn't done before. It's still A5, but turning it on its side 90 degrees was a cool new real estate graphically for me to explore that I had a lot of fun with. That and I want to share, if you could pull up my favorite illustration that I did, I'll share the collage page that we did. That was a large part of the world building that we wanted to get in, because it turned out we had an extra page right at the end.
That's always the best as a publisher, when you're like, no, it has to be sets of 4 and we have 2 or 3 or whatever, not all of them done, and you're like, what's the coolest thing we can do on these pages?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so with that we made like a collage of like conspiratorial newspaper clippings and trying to really reflect the world responding to the haze. And so getting to do that for Ultra Delve was a lot of fun. So in the collage I just sent you, Tony, I think my favorite illustration is that baby with his little fingers to his head. Um, that was a lot of fun to put together. So personally, I had a lot of fun putting it together, and the playtests were cool. And so just kind of getting to hold all of the levers on the kind of goopiness to alienness to how can I make this feel a little different um, than if it was kind of just like a bunch of diagonal lines and like xenomorph stuff, which I love, but I didn't want it to feel like alien. I wanted it to feel distinct from, I think, a lot of sci-fi like that.
Yeah. Yeah, just to shout out, so Balamo Blame by Nihei Tsutomu is something that I know and love that manga, but the ultra structures. But I had never heard of Satania, the graphic novel by Fabien Vellman and Carrascoet, who are the French illustrators, and that really blew our minds. I think Tony, when we're looking at that sort of, it's like a dungeon delve. It's like a dark modern dungeon delve graphic novel, but it's got very sort of, there's a softness to the illustration that I think was exactly the right move to what you're saying, Tony, to bring that in as opposed to yet another to the max like it's the Wayland Yutani vibes, right? And everything's chiaroscuro and dark. So this game, the book looks very bright. It has our trademark goop, and there's some beautiful pastel goop. But it really is about real people and the modern. It's not sort of jumping ahead to dystopia, even though the world is obviously messed up and changed. But yeah, to Tony Vicenda, what you were saying, it really is that idea of like overnight a thing has changed. There's an isekai like button that was pressed, and now there's a job to do that.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's great. Aru5 says the baby's name is Samuel Bing Bong or Big Bong, which who knows. That sounds great. And then this, I think, has to come to my statement. Hex of Hexagon wants to know if there are rankers in Ultra Delve. It's an important trope in gate fiction. This is, I think, people who are essentially competitive in some way, shape, or form in their delving.
That's a great idea. It's not currently in the book, but I do think, Vex, you should add that in the Grid System Game Jam, or we could talk offline about, because I know, like, shout out Hunting Billionaires for Sport. I know that you have other great games about that, basically. So I think that could be easily brought into this world. It's I will say the world building is very much sketched. It is mostly through Tony's great art and graphic design, and there's a couple tables of like backgrounds, like why am I delving now, that are like, oh, I lost my job and I can't, like, I need to afford my mortgage, or like I have a sick family member and my bills are piling up. Like there's meant to be a modern sense of urgency and precarity, which is in contrast to the sense of adventure and freedom of the dungeon delve, which I think, again, to Tony Vicenda, what you're saying, I think is a kind of modern, like, I'm thinking of Dungeon Crawler Carl, like that vibe of like, hey, we're all a little precarious. While it would be bad if aliens dropped out of the sky and messed everything up, it also would be like, it would shake up the order of things. So I do think like ranker kind of vibes would be perfect for this, but yeah, it's not currently.
And it's the classic, like, oh, gamers suddenly have an insight into something that's happening in the real world based on, even if it's not a 1-to-1 and they still have to learn things like that level of, I've played the game, like I played games like this is a fun thing to kind of bring in. And here's the thing for both this is going to be coming to crowdfunding this year. Our goal as a whole for both parties is to have it be as quick a turnaround as possible, like we've been doing for our last few games. Also, too, because the great thing about Ultra Delve is that the core book is totally complete. It's also a chance for us to explore in partnership. Is there some expanded content that we want to do for both of these? So keep an eye out from both groups online for announcements about where and how you can follow that project. But this will be coming up in November of this year. That we'll be funding this for pretty rapid release. But it's also a good chance to test for some of these smaller projects. Is there more interest? Like, are there things that you want to see from these worlds? So Hex, to your question of like, can there be rankers? Can there be these other things? Like, those are great things for us to use the campaign to get feedback on, even though it may not change the specific things that we're putting out right now. It lets us think more in partnership with each other and with people who are playing the game. what are the things they're interested in this setting, and how do we want to see things develop as they go forward. So this is a great exploratory project for both of us. Super excited about it. As soon as Wythe showed it to me, I was like, oh no, I'm super into this. Let's figure out how to make it happen. And we just were able to get some of that across the line. So really excited about that. Keep an eye out for it. Tony, Wythe, anything else y'all want to shout out before we're done? Any other big and secret announcements?
I don't think so. I don't think we have. I don't think we have one last thing that we were ready to pull out at the end.
Cool. Yeah, no. The big announcement was Ultra Delve to be published by Ultra Delve by Constantine Paradius with art by Anthony Grasso, and the Stillfleet Studio to be published by Plus One Experience. And we're very excited to be working with Plus One on another game in addition to Picaro. And yeah, to what you teased, Tony Vicenda, the idea that maybe we will publish an adventure zine, so sample structure, along with Ultra Delve. And I do think Picaro is a great game. The grid system version, I think there's a lot we can do with capers there. So I think the idea of also giving folks some more specifically adventures to run on a magical real Earth, so sort of around 1700, but could be earlier, could be later. But it's the real world, but there's magic. And I think there's a lot of obviously huge problems at that time, just like today, that gig adventurers could help solve. And I think, to me, just personally, that is more interesting than secondary fantasy, where like it's not the actual world. And so I think we would love to kind of support that. If you're interested in naming our games, we'd love to hear. And we do love a lot of the work at Plus One Experience. I was actually thinking some of the stuff Tony and I are working on now, just to tease it, is we're working on sort of grit system for the OSR truly. Like, what would that really mean? High lethality, classless. And I was actually specifically thinking of like Mondo Fantastic and like some of these things that we could pull in as not just resources, but even like literally play them to build a world and then play an adventure game in that world. So I think a lot of what we're trying to do is make things that are additive. They're resources. They're not, what you don't have to only play our games, but we do like to think that they do add value. They're going to be sort of books you can go back to. So that's the pitch.
No, like I said, huge fan of the system. The way it blends a lot of what what Kids on Bikes does with what Slayers and a lot of other work by Gale RPG does into a really more unified element. Like I love, and I love both of those games also too. So like those are absolutely tremendous. But I think you've brought together such a unique blend of those things. It is so immediately accessible to people, and really excited to like dive into that more deeply with y'all. I wish we had a link to share with everybody to go follow that, but what you should do if you haven't yet is go check out the things that are currently up for the Grit Jam. If you aren't able to do something in the next week, that's totally fine, but you should absolutely go check out the different cool games that have popped up there. Follow those creators, follow along from the jam, and kind of see what's coming out of it. Because just because a jam is happening right now doesn't mean that you can't make something cool with the Grit system in a couple of weeks or for any of the upcoming things that we've talked about. I will say, Dance Macabre, I know you right now, is it fulfilling right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Enter the Nostalgiatron and Dance Macabre Medieval Horror Role-Playing are inbound from China as we speak. They should arrive with Studio 2, who distributes for us generally, by the end of September. So the hope is very early October, early into spooky season proper, you will get your physical copies. This is 1 year after, so you got the digital copies pretty much right away. You're getting the physical copies 1 calendar year later. We think that's pretty good, considering this is 3 books and a zine and a pen. But mostly it's the 3 books. Took a lot of time, and we are very proud of them. The ultimate look on the books is great. So hopefully backers will receive everything. I cannot guarantee that because we are at the mercy of global shipping. But yes, we're trying to fulfill as soon as we can all that we owe to our backers.
Awesome. Super excited. Also, the shout out Cat Game will be submitting soon also too from the chat. So another one in there also. This has been great. Go out and make something in the Grit system. Tony Wythe, thanks for joining me today, and we'll see everybody down the road.
Thanks so much for having us.